The first school on record in Iowa, and there may have been others, but the one-room rural school was set up by Dr. Isaac Galland of in the Keokuk region, a man of dubious character as we see him, but one who thought enough of his children to employ a one Berryman Jennings, a Kentuckian, as a tutor for them. Now, they laid out the whole state of Iowa with a school every 2 miles, so that no student, you see, would be more than 2 miles. Well, after the, now what they did was they legislated that the rural school would lay on 1 acre of ground.
Tell us what an average day was like in your rural school.
When you started with a little kindergarten, you had them from 5 years on through 8th grade. You had all of them. You had to have all the classes every day.
And we'd all assemble together and we'd have devotions every day. And then we'd start in with classwork, of course. Sometimes we'd have one in a class, sometimes more. And, of course, we had all our regular studies that they have in the city schools, you know, up to 8th grade. And we'd have a 15-minute recess in the morning, and the same in the afternoon, and 1 hour at noon. And then the kiddies would come before 8 and put their little dinner pails on the shelves in the back of the room. And I'd have to get there a little early so I could have an 8th grade boy to take care of the firing. You know, those big pot-belly stoves, you know. And the first part of the day, some of us have to sit in the seats close to the stove or stand by the stove and burn on one side and freeze on the other. Our feet would be cold all the time. But we lived through it. I think they were healthier for it or something. But and then by the dinner pails, we had a great big pail, looked like a milk pail, if you know what they are. And it had a dipper, you know, with a long handle, you know. And that was our community drinking cup. And where we got our water. We always had a well, of course, so we'd get fresh water whenever we wanted it. And near that we'd have a little wash pan and a towel. And we'd all wash our hands there, of course, and towel.
What about music? Did you have music in school?
Well, I think when I was in the homeschool, we had a record player.
And then the teacher, in the morning, most generally, you see, the school would be pretty cold because the school teacher would have to build the fire and warm the schoolhouse up. And this was kind of fun, and then she most generally would get out a book and read the book to us. That way we could all sit around the fire. Then the classes would start out almost always by the 1st grade, and in the 2nd grade, and 3rd grade, and 4th grade, and 5th grade, and so on. And I can remember we would have maybe 3 or 4 in a class, if you were like the 1st graders, and you came to the front of the school building and sat up there.
What happened if you got up to the recitation bench and you didn't know what to recite?
Well, that wasn't very good.
What were some of the extra things you did besides your regular studies?
Like when we came to school in the fall, the very first thing that was on our minds was the fire prevention program. We were very big in going out to all the farmers around and taking this checklist and, you know, finding out all the fire hazards, because we had a big county-wide program which we were, you know, our school was competing with all the rest of the schools for the big prizes.
Duties. Somebody, every week it changed, but somebody was on flag duty, somebody was on eraser duty, somebody was on duty to go heat the water to wash the hands for lunch, somebody was on the clean the tables off every noon,
Or maybe
for lunches.
hand out towels.
Yeah,
after you
to
wash
hand
your
out
hands.
paper towels.
I
We
think we
had
had
things
reading.
like reading and geography and arithmetic. It wasn't called math then, it was called arithmetic. And penmanship and, things like that, general things,
Yeah.
every day. But we had health
Maybe that's
on
the way
one
we
day
did
a
it,
week.
too.
And we had art on Friday. I always remember that. We had music on a certain day because it came over the radio from Ames or Cedar Falls.
We had Cedar Falls.
Together We Sing, and we had these books. Together We Sing. And we all had to get close back to the radio because it didn't work very well, and we pay attention, Oh, and we also had Dance Day that came over the radio from Ames or Cedar Falls,
Yeah,
one of
we
the
did a
two.
lot of dance.
And it was folk dance or something, and this lady it'd be like a square dance caller, only she'd teach us folk dances from other countries, and and the kids, the boys in my school all had cold, clammy hands. And, and sometimes in the winter they were just gray and, hard, icky, because they couldn't afford mittens.
Okay.
Oh, and you had to hold hands with them. Bingo, Bingo was his name, around the circle. Oh. This was required in our county. I thought it was required in the state, but I could be wrong. For every 8th grader to make an Iowa history booklet that was examined and graded and passed or failed by the county superintendent. And we worked on these, as I remember, all fall of my 8th grade year. And we had to do all kinds of research. I talk in here about trilobites and all that kind of stuff, like when Iowa was underwater. And I have a crinoid, is that right? A drawing of one. And every Friday we had Iowa Corn Club at our school. And this was kind of our local politics. Every year we elected officers to the Iowa Corn Club. I think we re-elected officers every semester. And we all had jobs in this political organization. And the purpose of it, I'm not real clear on, but I think it was just to promote our feeling of belonging to Iowa. And we'd start off our meeting with singing the Iowa corn song. We're from Iowa, Iowa. And when we'd sing, that's where the tall corn grows, everybody stood up and lifted their hands over their head. Oh, gee, your heart just beat faster,
Friday afternoons. That was like a treat of the week. I don't know when it started, 1 o'clock or something like that. See, school went from 9 to 4. But on Friday we got out at 3:30, which was like a treat in itself. And we always had art. I don't know what they call it, art or manual. It was manual something. What do they call that? Manual art?
Manual training.
Manual training. Maybe that's what they called it. Anyway, you'd make stuff, and the boys would usually got to go down the basement, saw wood, make birdhouses or something like that,
Did you have programs in your school?
We were expected to have a program once a year, and this was partly to raise funds and then partly for the kids to have an outlet, to do their little acting, singing, and so on. But after the program, you had the ladies of the district had made candy, and they had baked pies, and maybe you had some contests. This was always a nice thing for the community, and but it was really a big responsibility for the teacher.
The programs were just more or less, as the Christmas programs where everybody took part, and you had little dialogues and recitations and songs, and a lot of the schools we had an organ, an old pedal organ, that one of the girls in the community would come and play for the children to sing with.
We would have plays at Christmas time, and there was a singing. You had to get up. We had a beautiful stage.
I imagine most people brought lunches to school.
Everybody brought bags, the brown bags, or the rich ones had dinner pails.
Lard pails today.
Well,
At our
yeah,
school, they
had
had
lard
lard pails,
pails,
you know,
yeah.
those tin buckets. And the really rich ones had, there was only one girl in our school who was rich and modern, and she had a Bugs Bunny square, you know, just like you see now.
I thought that one of the nice things we did too in cold of the winter, we had a kerosene stove, and it seems to me that each one of us, I don't know where the teacher got the soup bone, but each one of us brought a vegetable. In the morning, this was peeled, and we put it all on the stove, and then at noon, of course, we shared the soup with our cold sandwiches.
Did you ever see them come in and open some of those lunch buckets? Do you remember what some of those lunch buckets looked like? I don't think mine was anything very fine, but it was bread and meat and something edible. But when you take cold pancakes and pull them out with nothing on them, just maybe cold pancakes rolled
And
up.
bread with lard on it?
Bread with lard on it. Bacon fryings were a real treat sometimes.
Oh, yes.
They were a little special because they had more flavor to them. But imagine eating lard today.
Yes, and the poor kids that didn't have anything but lard on their bread, then the rest of the kids called them lardage.
We had our hot lunch program in school, too. And that consisted of a dishpan of hot water on the heater. And we'd put jars of soup or whatever they brought, we'd put in that pan so it'd warm up for lunch. It was more of a lukewarm program is what it was.
Tell us what you did during the recesses.
And we would head outside, you know, in the worst kinds of weather. But the games I remember we played were steel sticks, Red Rover, fox and geese. Played a lot of sandlot football, at least the boys did, and killed themselves. Rolled in the poison ivy and everything else in the fall. We played a lot of softball, and that was the whole school played that, and a lot of fights erupted in that. Workup. We played a lot of workup. Of course, we had swings on the ground, which all the little girls would get on, swing the whole recess time, teeter-totter. Some snowball fighting when winter came, but that usually ended very quickly.
We had a pretty big area around our school, lots of oak trees, and in the fall we'd have acorn fights. And the boys' outhouse was down in one corner of this area. It was probably a 2-acre plot that our school was on, and the girls was in the other corner. Well, sometimes if you'd go down to the restroom at recess time, you know, one girl alone or maybe two girls, the boys would gang up on you and pelt you with acorns if you tried to come out, and you'd stand in the outhouse screaming for the teacher, you know, to come get these boys away so you could come back in. But they wouldn't leave you alone until recess was over.
The teacher says to me, why don't you go and play outdoors? I says, I'm afraid of them big boys.
One is in the wintertime, our favorite activity was sliding. We had a hill by the school. Then in the spring, when it'd start falling, the water would start running underneath there. It'd get kind of slushy. And every once in a while, you'd get your sled in there, and you'd stop all of a sudden, slide through that slush, and have to go in the building and sit on top of the big register.
And then we had recesses. I was probably the champion recesser, and anyway, if we'd get a recess in the morning, and then we'd play games outside.
What was your school building like?
Yeah, when I was thinking about dancing, I remember how the room was heated. There was just one source of heat in this one-room school, and that was when I first went to school, was a red-hot Franklin-type stove. And you were lucky if you got your desk close to that in the wintertime. I mean, that was really the only way you're going to keep warm. And later on, they got a gas heat. But I remember in some of the real cold days, we would really not heat the school very well. So what we would do was put on some kind of march on our record player, and we'd all march for about 15, 20 minutes. And we did that several times during the day. We'd just get up, and we'd march around. We had a great time just marching around the schoolhouse.
When I think of the smells in that country school, I want to tell you that must have been the most awful smelling place that you ever saw. Because I'm quite sure that nobody had more than 2 baths a week.
And some didn't have any. The teacher, I did, I often think of her and wish that I could see her. I wonder if she still smells.
To tell you, some of those people smelled to the high heavens. It was just god awful. You come in out of the cow barn, without a change of clothes, and especially a change of shoes, because you didn't have any other shoes. And then you add all those smells to a wet day around an old stove where everybody either backed up to the stove to get the rear part out of the warm, or they went into the front as long as they could stand the heat. And the smell that emanated from those wet I think of it today, and it just makes me literally, absolutely shudder.
And a beautiful, beautiful old bell used to be there. I can remember swinging on that bell, and if you get her just right, going, and get the rope just right, you go right up through the hole. Right back up through the hole. It just was such fun. That's a good old bell. If you could really get her going, she'd jerk you right up.
We had a cave, an underground cave right outside our school. It was a storm cave, kind of. I think, like if there was a tornado, we were supposed to get in it. God forbid. Because, it was the terror. Yeah, there were snakes in it. And there was a hole in the top, I suppose, a ventilation kind of thing that we used to, in the spring, if we got to go out and eat our lunches outside, we'd poke our orange peelings down there or our apple cores and feed the snakes, And you just imagine this thing filling up with snakes and the snakes pouring out this ventilation hole.
Do you know what happened to all the old school buildings after they closed?
Oh, my school building was in fairly good shape, and some people bought it, and it's now a house. They made it over into a house.
My school was a county park for a while. It was a red schoolhouse, so it was kind of picturesque. But we always went by it when I went over to my folks, and I'd salute it. But I noticed one time that it was burned up on the roof, and evidently it caught fire, or somebody set it afire, but they finally tore it down. It's gone now. But most of the schools around the county where I grew up have been turned into people's homes. They've remodeled them, and somebody's living there now. Or some of them, they got filled with straw or for cattle. I mean, if it was on a farmer's land, and he just bought it to use for storage.
What was it like to be a teacher in one of the old one-room country schoolhouses?
That first day when I looked at those kids, we had double seats. There were 2 great big boys there. I was 18, and they were 14 and 15. And then in that next seat right in front of us, 2 more big boys. And then there was 2 big girls, 8th grade kids, all these kids. And I tell you, I don't know if I looked scared or not, but I felt pretty scared.
Quite an experience at the end of my first month of teaching. Of course, I expected to receive $50 for the month, and I had to stay away from home, so I had a $12 board and room bill to pay, and there were 3 men on the board, and I had to go over to the president to get it, and he informed me that they didn't have any funds, that they were still paying their last year's teacher. Well, I thought, gee, how terrible.
Disappointing, did you?
So I went back to inform my landlady that I couldn't pay her either.
At first, the teachers were paid by the parents of the children, and one teacher received $1.25 per child.
Well, I got $28 at first. In the last year that I taught school, I got $50 a month. So that's what we got per month. That's what we got at that time. And we thought that was a lot of money.
After getting up about 6:30 in the morning and walking a mile to school, after I got to school, I had to build the fires and most generally carry in the wood and the coal and the cobs that we used in the stove. Did you always have to do that all by yourself?
No, there was naughty boys once in a while. They had to stay after school and carry in the kindling, cobs, help the lady out. Before I was married, I was actually, or you were actually, part of the community because there were many weeks that I wouldn't sleep in the same bed 2 nights in a row. Because what the people demanded of you, that you'd live in the community, you'd spend the night or so in every household in the school area. I've slept on straw ticks, I've slept on feather beds, under feather beds. Nice homes, very nice homes, to the very, well, the other way.
Every once in a while, the county superintendent would come by and check up on the schools, see how things were going. We usually had instructions of some kind or another that when the county superintendent come in, shape up. Not in those words, but that was the idea. You knew the teacher was scared to death of the superintendent. And they would come in unannounced. Sometimes you'd see the car, and sometimes they'd park the car where you couldn't see it. And you'd walk up to the schoolhouse and walk right in the door, And I think the teachers were in fear of that day happening, something coming, the county superintendent coming, and things being out of kilter. I can't remember exactly what the county superintendent's name was. Lucy Hall. Oh, yes. And she was stern, I guess. And there was no fooling around with Lucy Hall.
Is there anything you remember above everything else in your country school days?
The most embarrassing experience of my entire career at country school happened when I was in kindergarten. I was so intimidated. I was shy in the first place. And we had these old-fashioned desks, with the inkwell where you sat, the guy in front of you sat on your desk, you know what I mean? Their seat was your desk. Okay, I remember, towards the back of the room. And we had this rule, if you had to go to the restroom, that meant the outhouse, way out, you lifted your hand and one finger. If you had to sharpen your pencil, it was 2 fingers. I don't know, but there was a code up to 4 fingers. I raised my hand with my 1 finger, and I was embarrassed to do even that, to everybody, she's got to go to the bathroom, Well, I raised my hand, and the teacher was up having recitation with the 8th graders on geography or something. Here were these big kids up at the front of the room with the teacher, and she didn't see me. And I kept my hand up. I couldn't get out of my desk. I didn't have permission to get out of my desk. I sat there. I had to go. Bad. And finally I got up enough courage to go up and stand beside her. And she just let me stand there. And I was waiting to get into the conversation to say, Mrs. Forgy, may I go to the bathroom? And I stood there, and she kept talking to the 8th graders, and I wet my pants right in front of everybody, in front of the 8th graders. And she turned and said to me, Madeline, do you have to go to the bathroom? And I thought right then, 5 years old, boy, are you dumb? No, I don't have to go anymore. But she sent me out, and here, it was cold. I remember it was winter. And I went all the way down to the outhouse with my wet, I think I had jeans or something on that day. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't have to go anymore, so I just stayed down there till recess time, and I kind of dried off and froze a little bit. Oh, embarrassing. I remember that year because we had a Halloween party, and the big kids made a Halloween area down in the basement and brought us little kids through it. It was terrible. They turned off all the lights, and they had things like chicken hearts in a pan of water, and they took you through and made you feel this in the dark, and they said these are the dead man's eyeballs. And then you had to drink the dead man's blood, and it was tomato juice, and they had hose kind of strung up all around, and it felt like spider webs. And I just got through there, and I was just crawling. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever been through. And there was stuff on the floor like crackers, and they told you this was the bones of the dead man that they'd smashed up, and you were walking over, and you had to feel his brains, and they'd taken lungs and stuff out of a chicken, the entrails and stuff, and this was the brains you had to feel, and they made you put your hands in it. Feel this, yeah. Oh, terror.
And on Halloween, you could always count them coming back and having the outhouses or the toilets dumped over. This was a great trick for the boys in the community to dump the outhouses. And I just really don't remember what we did the next day.
Do you remember that little trap door at the back of the schoolhouse? And it was true, but because we once in a while would see muddy prints going up the wall. And there were at that time, many tramps in the country.
Oh, yes.
And in order to keep from freezing to death, they'd take shelter somewhere if the storms were bad. you could see their muddy prints going up there, and every once in a while you'd hear one of them sneeze or something upstairs, and we would just be in deadly horror all day for fear one of those men would come climbing down out of that. I don't know how they took care of themselves up there, but they were there. Just going to the toilet was a problem. It was an adventure. You take a big storm moving in, and the girls' outhouse was way up here, and I think it had 2 or 3 holes in it. And I never saw the inside of the boys, but it was way over there. And I assume it was something similar. But you take a real big storm and no shovels, and we didn't have the boots we have today, and it was a first-class adventure just to try to stumble. And it was clear across the school ground. It was a good, must have been close to a block.
Oh, I'd say more than that.
Probably. And when your legs are short and fat and you have to stumble through a snowdrift to get there, that was an adventure.
Sometimes you didn't get there.
Do you think people received a good education in the one-room country school?
We had 35 students at one time in this country school, with one teacher handling the whole work. But I think the greatest advantage from having that conglomerate together is the little kids learn so much from the big kids.
Mm-hmm. And the big kids learned it over, because like if you were in 5th grade, the teacher would sometimes say, go sit with the 2nd graders and help them with their phonics or something, and you would relearn what you hadn't learned, at that time. And it was really fantastic. There's always something going on around the room, and even if you're daydreaming, if your mind isn't on what you're supposed to be doing, there's something going on somewhere that you either relearn or you get a glimpse of it, so that, if it's the 8th graders working in your 5th grade, you get a glimpse of maybe algebra, so that when you get there, you know something about what it's about.
One of the other favorite things we did at noon was have 20 questions among all the kids. And we would ask inventors. The kids in our school knew every inventor, every explorer. We knew all the capitals of all the states and unions, because it was a question that came up over and over and over. When I got to high school, I was one of the few people that I knew of that knew the capitals, because we played these type of games all year long, and it was very, very competitive. Who invented the sewing machine? What's the capital of West Virginia? And we always tried to come up with the tough ones to stump the people, but after a while you couldn't stump anybody. So here was 35 students who knew who the first president was, where the first capital of Iowa was. We knew a lot about the state history of Iowa.
I mean, no one teacher could teach all that a teacher was supposed to. But the one-room rural school took advantage of the experience of having all these grade levels, and they kept the grade levels separated. And of course the 3rd graders gleaned from the 6th graders, and the 5th grader learned what the 6th grader was doing, and so then the 7th grader reviewed what the 6th grader was doing, and that way they got it over and over until some of them at least had it pretty well.
We learned a lot of things in the old country school because they respected basic education.
Who's they?
The teachers, the parents, and the children were taught to respect the basics. They probably never would go beyond 8th grade. That was rather acceptable. If you finished your 8th grade examination, you were considered fairly well educated. And believe it or not, in many cases you were well educated. That's the strange part about it. Because you knew your reading, your spelling, your writing, your grammar, your arithmetic, and you knew how to speak, and you knew how to listen.
There was more discipline in the schools at that time, I felt. In fact, I think there was more discipline in the home at that time. Much more discipline. My mother said, you go to school. I can remember I went home and told on the teacher that I thought she was mean to me. So you go back, and that's your teacher. You're going to do as she says you're going to do. And if you get a whipping from her, you're going to get one when you come home. And if she sends you home homework, I expect you to bring it home and do it here.